I'll do my next story. What I want to know is, what do you know about the captive panda conservation situation?
The only thing I've seen of note in the last few years about that is that it's tied to diplomacy and geopolitics with China, but I haven't looked into it any more than knowing it's tied to it.
Yeah, the New York Times just did a really long sort of investigative journalism piece about panda breeding, the Chinese panda breeding and lending program, and it found a lot of problems and dishonesties that are going on. The major conclusions are that the pandas are not being used to repopulate the wild. In fact, more are being taken from the wild than are put back. The pandas are being sent around the world in a way that isn't important for breeding, and they're not contributing to genetic diversity. So, like, China keeps the best genetic pandas back in China, and they send sort of superfluous pandas around the world. And the zoos breed the pandas mostly because cubs are very popular rather than because they're useful for the gene pool. So, one quote I thought was good was Dr. Bacon from the director. She's the director of the Bear Care Group and veterinarian at the University of Central Lancashire. She said, "All we're doing is producing more pandas to live in captivity and have those same experiences over and over again." And by those experiences, she means a lot of abuse that has been uncovered with how they're dealing with the pandas.
What kind of abuse?
So, the animals are not effectively anesthetized when they do the artificial insemination. They often wake up during the procedures, and then they're inseminated over and over, and their babies are taken from them to get them in heat earlier. None of these things are recommended breeding practices. However, most of these violations happened during the first few years of the panda breeding program. So they have improved.
Did you say they're taking more from the wild than they're breeding or something?
Apparently that's what the New York Times found. No, sorry. They're taking more from the wild than they are putting back in the wild.
So in zoos across China, they're not just getting pandas from breeding programs, they're going out and capturing wild ones.
They will take pandas that are hurt from the wild, and they'll take them and put them in zoos and say that they're going to rehabilitate them, but then they never actually put them back out. And the ones that they've done that to are more in number than the pandas that they've released from the breeding programs into the wild.
If they're sending pandas out that with poor genetics to these other places around the world, why is that part of the reason why pandas are so hard to it's so hard to get them to breed?
I think that the pandas, it's not that they have poor genetics. Sometimes it's just genetics that aren't needed, like overrepresented genetics. And sometimes it's that the pandas aren't as fertile, especially as a match or as a pair compared to the pandas that they're keeping. So it does contribute to some of the fact that the zoos will try to breed the pandas and artificially inseminate them over and over with no cubs. But it isn't exactly the reason why the pandas are so hard to breed in captivity. I feel like that is more related to nutrition and reaction to a captive environment, and maybe just personal preference. Like they don't like this certain panda that they're being put with. So it's a really good investigation. I recommend if you have the New York Times to read it. I did have a gift article that I shared with Thomas, but I don't know if I'm allowed to share that with everyone who listens to the podcast. I guess. I mean, I don't know. Just
Yeah, I
read
don't
it
know
if
how
you
that
can,
works.
basically.
It's pretty dark.
Yeah, but it's good that they're sort of uncovering it because I do think that it will lead to more transparency about zoos' decision making regarding pandas. However, I don't think China has the best record of like something being exposed and them being like, we're going to respond with more transparency. So, yeah.
Yeah, they'll probably just blacklist any journalist who figure that out.
Another problem is that we are not sure of these numbers. Like they say that the number being taken from the wild is more than the number being released, but the New York Times can't confirm that because the China panda counts are notoriously unreliable. Like no one knows how they're getting those numbers, and they're not allowing outside confirmation.
All right. Well, if you can find the article to read, we recommend you give it a look.
Yep. Subscribe to the YouTube channel for full episodes or download the MP3 from the links below.